Vancouver home prices have increased for the first time in 9 months. Does that mean we've just hit bottom and we're already rebounding? Well, we're going to get into that, and we're also going to discuss inventory, which is doing something we have only seen once before in history here in Vancouver. We're going to get into those, do a deep dive into the February numbers, plus go over what the BC budget for 2023 looks like and how it's going to affect housing. From there, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening with our predictions and where we can expect prices to go in the Vancouver market in the upcoming months. So this is a very important episode, especially for those of you who have been watching the markets on the sideline, maybe trying to time the market, wait for your opportunity. Well, we're going to discuss if maybe this is it. And even more so, if you really want to know what the market means for you in your specific situation, just feel free to reach out to us. The contact info is below. So let's get right into the Vancouver real estate market update for March 2023. Off the top, we always talk about the sales volumes. How many homes sold last month? Well, that number, 1,808. Now, what does that mean? Well, it jumped dramatically from January. It's up like 77%. That's fairly typical, right? We always see slower sales in January compared to February. But what's not so typical is we started at such a low baseline with like just over 1,000 sales last month. That 77% is a pretty dramatic increase. Now, how does that look like when we open up the picture a bit here and we'll go back to February of 2022? Well, it's actually about 47% less sales than we saw this time last year. And a big reason for that, of course, is that there's not much to buy based on this insanely low inventory that we have. The average sales were so low, they're like 33% below the 10-year average. And again, for reference, because I find references so important, January, the previous month, was 43% below the 10-year average. So we're actually increasing as far as 10-year averages go, but clearly well below the norm when it comes to sales.
Like artificially low in many ways. You know, this feels like it's too low for it to sustain at this level. So I agree, Dan. I think things need to perk up. I know we've increased by 77%, but you know, when you look at the 10-year average and we're still 33% below that, you know, it speaks a lot to the frustration I think buyers are having out in the marketplace right now. And further to that, when we speak about new listings with only 3,467 of them, that's a 37% decrease compared to February 2022. And only a marginal 5.2% increase compared to January of last month. There's still no one listing. And you can go back and check a lot of our previous episodes to find out all the different reasons as to why that's the case. But largely the environment, you know, a lot of people have been, in the past 3 years, they've been locking up their property at extremely low rates. And those properties that we would typically see coming to market right now, they're delayed. They're not coming. And there's a number of different pullbacks from developers. And there's a lot of different reasons. But the story continues to be very few new listings and extremely tight inventory.
So let's get into that inventory. What is going on and why did I talk about it right off the top? Well, what's happening here is incredibly unique, because we're only sitting right now at about 7,870 listings, okay? And that's only a 5% increase coming off of last month. Now, if you look historically, December is always going to be kind of a bottom of inventory because so many people take their homes off the market or just don't list in that month. Well, typically when January hits, it spikes, and definitely in February. Well, this is the second time, and only the second time in all of history, where we've basically seen flat inventory for January and February. It's super unique, and it's really setting us up for a twice in a lifetime kind of spring market here. Because when the demand is growing, as we're seeing, but the inventory is flatline, it's going to cause, well, we're going to get into what it's causing, because it's shifting the market dynamically, but in a way that isn't typical. Okay, so the last time that the market was this flat with inventory was 2021 for the January, February markets. And that was when sales were peaking. There were over 3,800 homes sold in February of 2021, which is more than double what we just saw last month. So we're seeing huge demand with incredibly tight inventory, and that is setting us up for a very remarkable March, April, May spring market here.
Yeah, and the first metric to really take a look at, and has really surprised us with these numbers coming out in February here, the sales to active ratio, which again, this is in many ways one of the biggest indicators for buyer behavior or buyer and seller behavior. But we went from 13% last month, which was a balanced marketplace, into a 23% sales to active ratio. That's a jump of 10%. That's a massive, massive jump in 1 month. We went from what arguably balanced scenarios, balanced buying environment, balanced selling environment, to, without question, a seller's market, right? Like if we were hovering around 18, 19, 20%, I would say things are, getting there, but 23%, that's a solid seller's market. Would you agree, Dan?
Numbers don't lie. I mean, it's above 20%, right? So yeah, you used that word artificial a little earlier on, which I found somewhat accurate, because again, it doesn't feel like a seller's market, but the ratio is designed by how many sales there are to how many active listings there are. And so by that metric, we are in a seller's market because it's so tight. And at the end of the day, let's be honest, how many times have we and all our colleagues within the industry talked about multiple offers in this last month? They're huge. We haven't talked about multiple offers in 8 months, and suddenly like a huge portion of the industry is talking about them. On top of that level of confidence and these rate of multiples that are happening, I'm now seeing this last week 3 listings that hit the market and they're all holding offers. And they're not listed radically low. They're holding offers, expecting it to go into multiples and sell for over ask.
We even
that changed so fast. Now again, 3. Okay, sure, that's not the industry norm, but when you haven't seen that in 8-9 months, it's a real indicator of what may happen during the spring market.
Yeah, it's definitely a change in trends. Now, before we call this a seller's market, that's very different, right? We have entered a seller's market, but we need to at least see this trend for a minimum of 3 months before we're going to declare anything a seller's market. So just to make some clarity there. But just to give you guys some perspective here too, January was a 4-year low in the sales to active ratio. And my goodness, it took 1 month to see how quickly that could change. After being in a balanced market since July, and now all of a sudden we're back into a seller's market. This is in many ways far more of a function in my mind of inventory than it is interest rates or anything to that effect. With that being said, throughout this crazy cycle that we've been in, our city of Vancouver never entered a buyer's market. That to me, at least not yet. And all things with the way the stats are coming in right now, I don't think we're going back that way. It's hard to say right now, but my goodness, a buyer's market, when you look back over the last 20 years, it's only happened 9% of the time. So very, very, very seldom do we find ourselves in an environment that is primed for buyers. And what we just kind of went through was a less than idyllic situation for buyers, but it was still in buyers' favor more than it was in the seller's favor. So if we break it down by asset class here, we look at detached homes. They came in at 16.8%. So we're still looking at a relatively buyer or balanced market there, but up dramatically, 6.6%. However, townhomes, this is an incredible story. Townhomes crossed 30.1% in the sales to active ratio. That is well into a seller's market. We're looking at a 17% increase month over month. This is a tremendous uptick. And apartments, they also had a big move, up 9%, 25.8%. So both townhomes and apartments are cruising in a seller's market when it comes to buyer and seller behavior.
Very curious to see where this lands for the month of March here, because if it sustains in a seller's market, it's going to dictate what's going to happen to pricing. So we're watching this one closely. Very interesting, and to see it shift that dramatically month over month, as the Vancouver market seems to do. So let's get into prices. Right off the top, I mentioned that prices increased, and we were first referencing the HPI. So yes, for the first time since the peak when prices started to come down, prices have gone up. So prices increased for the first time in 9 months by 1.1%, now sitting at $1,123,000. Does that mean last month was the bottom? Are we on our way up? Let's keep in mind here, we are 13.7% off of the peak from last month. We're a little bit tighter now, of course, because prices have increased. We're now, 12.5% off the peak. For 6, 7, 8 months now, I've talked about the HPI never dropping below 15%, and that was my prediction moving forward. It's very hard to predict, but based on history, based on what happens in the industry, when Vancouver home prices get in and around that range, we see it bounce back. I don't feel comfortable calling this a bottom. I think there's a lot of things that can still happen this year. But if it happens to be the bottom, or if things even just go sideways, which still constitutes technically a bottom if it goes up again, there's that 15% resilience line being hit once again. Vancouver real estate, once it hits 15% off of its peak, it comes back. So we'll dive more into that should this sustain. But again, very fascinating to see this happen again, right? This 15-point thing has hit 3, 4, 5 times in the major cycles historically, going back to the 70s. So again, fascinating to see it repeating itself. Yeah. So
I just to add a little bit to that, Dan, I'm just, it's funny because you look at the marketplaces outside of real estate. You look at the stock market, the NASDAQ, and how they're responding to the speculation over interest rates. And it's amazing that we just don't see that level of fluctuation taking place in the real estate sector, especially Vancouver. I think it's really important for people to understand we're not talking nationally here. We are talking specific to Vancouver, because Vancouver has its own micro market pressures that don't exist across the country. And so it's very important to recognize that this is a different marketplace than the rest of Canadian real estate.
Very much so. Vancouver has removed itself from the national averages a long time ago and continues to buck the trends. And here we are again, right? Don't bet against the house is the pun we keep using. And here it is being true once again. So look, how do those prices compare to where we were a year ago? Well, prices are down 9.3% from this time last year. Though let's go back and let's open it up a little bit further. If you were to have bought a house in March of 2020, so where are we from pre-pandemic prices? Sitting where we are today, up 20%. So that's like buying a home in March of 2020 and seeing your home appreciate 7% annualized for 3 years in a row. Still incredibly big numbers, right? The typical homes, if we go now, North America, for example, you'd like to see about 3%, maybe 4% annually. So even after this 13.5% drop off the peak, we're still looking at a 7% annualized gain in property prices over the last 3 years. Just incredibly high numbers. And what's that?
So resilient.
Yeah.
Like this marketplace just is so resilient.
So let's dig one layer deeper, or 2 layers deeper. Let's talk about the median price and why we saw HPI jump this month. Median is up $30,000 last month, now at $930,000. This is a 9-month high in median price, and we're up $60,000 in just the last 2 months alone. Median is technically back to May of 2022 prices. Average, another big jump there too, up $56,000, sitting now at $1.223 million. And the average price is sitting the highest since October of 2022. So both median and average jumped around 5% last month alone.
Wow. Thank goodness. Well, the next thing that I think a lot of people often need to pay attention to is how long is property sitting on the market for, right? It's a very good indicator as to how well priced the property is and the behavior of the buyers looking to purchase it. So last month we were averaging around 30 days. So a whole month is what you would expect your property to sit on the market for. That has now been cut down to 14 days. So if you are priced to market, if you are you've marketed your home correctly, you could expect your home to sell in 2 weeks, which is dramatically faster than a month ago. And again, speaks a lot to the behavior that we're seeing in the marketplace here.
When it comes to behaviors too, I think it's a great segue into this section here. The spread between buyer and seller expectations has never been bigger during about the last 5-6 months here. Oh, yeah. Sellers know that they saw their home peak about a year ago and they're wishing they had either sold then or they still unfortunately believe they can get that kind of price, even though their home may have come down 10, 15, 20% in actual market value. And then on the other side, you've got these buyers who think, well, the bottom's still dropping out. We're still going to see another 20%. And so you'd see this home listed for $2 million and you'd get these offers at 1.5 and nothing would happen, right? Both buyers and sellers are like, no way, each other party's out to lunch here. Well, the reality of list price to sales price, it bottomed at 95%. So that means if you saw $1 million home, it was selling for $950,000 on average. Well, that spread technically is now tightening. It's now up to 97%. So that same $1 million home is now selling for $970,000. So while, I've got a listing here in the Knight area that is listed for 2.4, and I keep getting these phone calls with these verbal offers at 2 million or 2.1. And the seller's just like, no, you don't even have to reply to that. Like, there's no chance. I don't, what am I trying to say here? There's nothing wrong with the agent trying that, right? 1 in 100 of those calls, you may find that ultra motivated seller. So there's nothing wrong with it. And it's better to make the call than to paper it, because that just wastes everybody's time. Regardless, those calls, I think, are going to start to disappear, because we're seeing things like the spread technically start to shrink. And of course, with prices going up, people are like, oh, okay, this changes things a lot, which I guess leads us to what's going to happen next. Or actually, no, let me just finish on this. So if you're out there looking at a home right now, you can expect to see the list price, expect to be able to get it under contract for about 3% less. Super subjective based on listings. Of course, some people list high, some people list low, but on average, expect it to sell for about 3% under what you see that listed price to be, if it's priced well to market. And that leads us to what I guess we think is going to happen next year. This is going to largely hinge, of course, on the March 8th interest rate announcement. If they leave it flat, if they do no changes, and we're in this environment we are, from all the numbers we just shared with you, I believe there is going to be further confidence in the marketplace, and people will, I'm not going to say rush to market, but we're going to see a noticeable increase in interest levels and people trying to buy the scraps that are out there.
I don't disagree. But again, I think a lot of it hinges on what happens on March 8th. I think if we end up with, I think if the bank holds, it's a significant indication to the marketplace that a couple of things. One, that they're prepared to wait and see what they have done and whether or not that's going to be enough to help control inflation, at least send it in the direction and continue that path. Or they're likely, or not likely, or they may raise. And if they raise, it'll be by a marginal amount, probably 0.25%. There'll be one of those two outcomes. I would like to think that it's going to be the former, not the latter. And the reason for that is because when you actually take a look at what's happened to Canada's GDP, in the third quarter of 2022, Canada's overall GDP was 2.3% growth. Right now, that's a fairly significant number. However, when you back it up a year earlier, Canada's GDP was 3.4% and topping 2.2 trillion. So a massive increase in GDP growth. When you fast forward to Q4 of 2022, Canada's growth stalled 0.0%. Now, the other interesting part, that's the quarterly review. But when you look at the month over month rollovers and you look at December having grown by 0.1% and January 0.3%, you're seeing indicators from the marketplace that it appears that what's happened in the past 8-9 months has pushed and taken a lot of steam out of the marketplace. And I mean the entire economy. But it has resisted going into a recession, at least for the time being. So I'm really interested to see, I think Tiff Macklem is going to try his best to keep the steam out of the economy without pushing it into a recession. However, I'm not sure that's possible. And I really think the next 3 to 6 months are going to dictate that. And we're in sort of like the fourth part of a 5-part cycle, if you will. So I think we're still flushing some things out. We may see a 1 to 2, maybe 3% fluctuation up or down. But again, we're looking at a fairly volatile market because things are washing out and policies have been driven in where they weren't before.
Speaking of policies, and without us being a political channel whatsoever, we do want to touch on the BC budget that came out this week, at least when it comes to the housing elements that they talked about. Maybe first, Ryan, why don't you talk about the renters tax credit that they have offered?
Yeah, again, we're trying to solve an inflation issue, right? So the amount of times that we continue to hand out cash is not helping the problem, right? The problem is high prices. The problem is high taxes. And if that keeps changing on us, it's impossible for people inside the economy to plan. And people like to plan their finances. And so when you continue to increase, these affordability measures where we're giving back $400 to a renter once a year. I mean, the average rent is $2,700 a month downtown Vancouver right now. $400 once a year is contributing to inflation. It's not contributing to affordability, in my mind.
Well, no, you're exactly right. And it's ridiculous, in my opinion, to see them still pushing out free money to help solve high costs. This doesn't work. Again, why are rents at all-time high? Because there's more demand than supply. It doesn't break down much harder than that. Well, let's get a little bit further, because they have a big section regarding affordable and attainable housing. And in the budget, they first like to give themselves a little pat on the back, which is a bit interesting here, because they had a plan that they launched in 2018. And they quote here saying, the province has funded more than 40,000 affordable new homes, and BC has seen record housing starts and thousands of empty homes return to the rental market, thanks in part to the speculation and vacancy tax. Way to go. Okay, since 2018, I'm sorry, but property prices hit all-time high since then, earlier last year. And as of today, rents are at an all-time high. So I don't know how these affordable new homes and spec tax have done anything to solve any problems. In fact, they've clearly done the opposite. You can't tell me that rents are all-time high on one hand and tell me that the tax has put enough homes on the market. It hasn't. Mm-hmm. Anyway, moving on. So the new budget, they've allocated $4.2 billion over the next 3 years, essentially to build homes. If we break this down, and this is all BC, right? So there's going to be obviously parts of the province that have more affordable places to build and buy land, build homes, etc. But I think if we strip it down, let's say on average, $350,000 to buy land and build a home on it, right? Including multifamily, blah, 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 right? We're just all looping it in here. That $4.2 billion, based on that buy and build cost, you're sitting at about 12,000 homes will be added over the next 3 years. Mm. If we put 3 people in each of those homes, you're adding housing for 36,000 people over the next 3 years. British Columbia.
That's assuming you can get those cost numbers too.
Sure.
Right.
Oh,
otherwise it just gets worse.
Assumptions in here. Yeah. There's infinite variables and presumptions in this. I'm just kind of speculating a bit here, but I think it's good to kind of break it down, right? 4.2 billion can sound like a great number. Cool. They're doing something. Okay. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So using these presumptions, 350K build, 12,000 homes, 3 people per home, 36,000 people. British Columbia is growing at the rate of about 75,000 people a year and targeted to increase that rate, obviously, over the next 3 years. So that's over that same 3 years. That's another 225, let's call it 250,000 people in the province. So those 36,000 people that they're building affordable homes for, that covers 6% of the people coming in. And we're in a crisis for inventory today, both on housing and for rental housing. So while they're doing something and we applaud it, it is, when you break it down in that method, it's a drop in the bucket. And again, we've got the public sector begging to build homes to help this situation, and they're just cutting them off at the neck, saying, no, red tape, more time. Your plan to get building permits pushed through quicker. The people that I know in the industry, they've all said there's zero chance of that happening. We'll see, of course. But as of today, they're kind of championing themselves, saying that, hey, yeah, we're going to build for less than 6% of the new population, but we're not going to help the public sector, join us in this endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, this problem. The other thing I think, to bring some context to it, is not going to get fixed by any government, right? Like, this is a problem. This is a problem that's existed for 30 years. And, the time to do something was was back then. Was, and it's not now. Now is, now we're just band-aiding things. We're putting fingers in holes in a boat, right? And then more water pops out of a different hole. So in many ways, the things that are required to bring balance to a marketplace like this are much bigger than what we're seeing right now. I think if we touch on a little bit about, maybe I'll touch on a little bit about the property tax here, Dan, and then you can get into David Evie. But I do want to talk a little bit about property tax too, because the city of Vancouver has just increased it by 10.7%. They proposed 9.7, right at the last second, increased it by another percent. This is the highest increase in over a decade, right? And if we kind of break down where some of this new revenue is going to go, 4.2 million of it is going to go to Vancouver firefighters. That's to fund 33 new positions. 600,000 is to increase grass and plant maintenance. 300,000 to engineering services for road maintenance and pothole repair. I am all for that line item, FYI. 180,000 for cleaning grants to support plazas and parklets, and then $110,000 to the Vancouver Public Library for one person. Anyhow,
I'm sorry. I was fascinated to find out that there's positions at the Vancouver Public Library that pay into the six figures.
Oh yeah,
not bad.
Yep. Oh yeah,
we're paying for it with house taxes, but anyway.
Yeah, exactly. There's so a couple of things about this property tax increase. I'm all for the city running better and for services for them to perform better and for them to be, honestly speaking, well funded. However, when was the last time the city of Vancouver did a public audit on what they're currently spending numbers on? And anytime, if you're a small business, anytime you're going to increase your costs, you've got to look at how you can save them too. Because generally speaking, to balance a budget, there are some elements that no longer make sense in the last 7 years, and there are elements that need to be addressed going forward. So I just want to know whether or not the city of Vancouver has actually taken a good, serious, hard look at all of the line item budgets, audited correctly by a third party, to see whether or not this is the best way forward before we start taxing people because it's easy to do. That's my issue with this. And I don't know if that's been done. I just don't think it has. When you look in the last 7 years ago, the budget was about $1 billion to run the city of Vancouver. 7 years later, we're $1.7 billion. That's a tremendous increase in inflationary costs. That's one part of it. And the other side, Dan, is we're being told that inflation's running at 5.9% core inflation. And yet we just got a tax increase of 10.7%. So you tell me where the real inflation numbers are.
Yeah, good point. And of course, the the rental rate increase, depending which side on. I know it's contentious, but again, the housing providers that are only allowed to increase their rents 1.5–2% annually here, they're the ones paying the bill for this 10.7% property tax increase on their housing provider, on the house that they're providing for renters. And then, yeah, just for reference too here, I just wanted to go back and kind of give people an idea of what type of property tax increases have happened over the last 13 years. From 2010 to about 2016, property taxes were increasing at the rate of 2%, 2.1, that kind of thing. They kind of steadily increased. 2017 to 2019, it was at 4%. Okay, then there was a spike in 2020 where it hit 7%. That was the last highest, dipped again, and now, of course, we're at 10.7. So 10.7 is so high above the average. The average is sitting here at about 4.5–5% over the last 13 years. So it's a huge jump, and it will be felt. I mean, I think the average, what did I read? $362 odd, I think, was the average increase in property taxes. But what's worse is that they're looking to increase this another 8% or so, setting expectations, saying, hey, okay, great. Yeah, this year's 10.7, but get ready for 8-ish over the next 5–6 years, which will put, by the time it's all said and done in 7, 8, 9 years now, property taxes are going to be up about 80% if they stick to today's plan. 80%. Your $3,200 per year is suddenly going to be $6,000 a year. That's a massive jump.
Yeah, you're going to drive a whole lot of investment out of the province by doing that. Certainly out of the sectors, maybe not out of the province, but out of Vancouver primarily, because if they can't get the revenue to cover the cost, you think we've got a bad inventory problem now, it's going to get worse. And the other thing too, Dan, instead of stroking homeowners for more taxes, the other way to do this, there's a couple other ways, in my opinion. First of all, number one, you could build more homes, and just at the current tax rates, you would generate far more revenue if you were able to build more homes faster. So more people could pay more tax. That's one thing. The other side of it is, how about something like an income qualifier for property tax? How many people and I'm all for deferring taxes for the right reasons, but if you're talking about a property in Point Grey and the property's worth $10 million, the family in there, they're retired, let's say, and let's say they've got investments and they're able to pull income of $500,000 through their retirement funds in order to live in the West Side, but they're deferring all of their property taxes because of their age. Property taxes should probably be deferred based on income, not on age. I think if we started looking at that, then the person who bought their home for $300,000 and it's now worth $3.7 million, and they've been in there for 40, 50 years, that person making $30,000 a year, they're being qualified by their income versus just where they live, because they live there and they made a choice 40 years ago to live there. And now they've got to pay unreasonable amounts of tax based on what's happened to the value. And then they defer it, so it never gets paid until a home sells, which could be 40 years later. So, the system to me doesn't work. And the easiest thing to do is to stroke the people who are paying their property tax already. So I don't like it. As much as I'm all for, the city running in its best way ever. But, there's smarter ways to do this. And I think it demands homeowners asking tougher questions of their politicians. We can't just be cash call recipients and sign checks and just go on our way. It doesn't work like that.
Well, there you have it. Ryan has just announced his candidacy to run for premier.
God, no, I never want that position.
Yeah, fair. Okay, well, lots of info today. Thanks so much for sticking around, watching us to the end. We are entering a very fascinating market. March is going to be unique. Again, reminder, if you're getting value out of this, please just subscribe or share it with a friend. And hey, if you want to talk about what's happening in housing specifically for you, does it make sense to buy? Is this the bottom? Just reach out anytime. Our info is below. Thanks as always for tuning in. Have an awesome day.